whole idea of, got it, is about shifting the internal representations in our minds. And we don't often spend a lot of time here because we cover it and we spend so much time teaching it, right? It's a concept that we really do have to understand first and foremost. And then over time, we can really start playing with it. But the courses that we teach, both in Prac and in PACE, we definitely go into it in more detail in Master Prac, but in Prac and PACE, we spend the bulk of the time just sort of being able to use the tools and understand submodalities that we don't get to do this deep dive into it. So that's what we're going to do. So I want to start off. What's really important about submodalities is going all the way back, like way back to just what is NLP. And so, most of you have been practicing for a little while. You've been working with coaches or with clients. And I don't know how you explain it, but the going definition, I would say, is to define it as the science of modeling excellence, right? So NLP can be well described, and I think accurately described, as the science of modeling personal excellence. It's what we do. And so what we have to keep in mind is that NLP itself is just a model. That's what it is, right? So sometimes people will say things like NLP doesn't work. And you'll hear people talk about it. And what they're demonstrating there is that they clearly don't have a very good understanding of what NLP is right out of the gate, because it's the equivalent of saying cooking doesn't work as a thing that doesn't stand, right? You can't say cooking doesn't work just because you burned a batch of muffins or because you don't like what you cooked. NLP is a model. To say that NLP doesn't work would be to say that modeling excellence doesn't work. And this, we know, is an absolute core truth of how we operate night and day. If you were to read a book, if you were to read, one of Grinder's books or something on NLP and didn't know it was NLP, so if it didn't actually say in the title, this is about neuro-linguistic programming, what you would find is just that it's this very logical approach or system of that is very intriguing and intuitive about how we create success within ourselves, how we model, how we do the things that we do. And you can always improve on how you do something by understanding even better how you do it, right? So I'm speaking both conscious and unconscious. So the conscious knowing of how to do something better, of course, is going to lead you to doing it better. And then very often the unconscious knowing of how to do something, right? And we're all very, very familiar with this in terms of muscle memory and practicing piano and, learning all of the things to drive and all the things that we do automatically. So I think it's really, it's really interesting. Also, the idea that generalizing, deleting, and distorting is just a fundamental principle of how we all live, every single one of us, right? So even the very act of saying NLP doesn't work, I have to take my hair out, it's driving me crazy to look at it, of saying NLP doesn't work is generalizing. It's using NLP to disqualify NLP. And so when we look at things like submodalities, the reason I'm emphasizing this is because I think sometimes we lose track, right? So, there's Tara. If we're not paying attention to the structure of what we're doing, we can get ourselves really sort of overwhelmed by the tools and whether or not we're actually executing the tool, and forgetting about the objective of what we're doing. Forgetting that what we're essentially doing is we're going into somebody's experience and we're shifting and altering their experience through internal representations and shifting it to one that is more positive. So another way to approach this is to remember that NLP, so when Bandler and Grinder first started naming this idea that they were diving and delving into, calling it NLP. What they were paying attention to was three very specific people, right? So they were noticing who are the greats, because they understood fundamentally that they were getting somewhere. They were getting traction with the idea of, if you just follow people who do something really, really well, who do it great, then you're going to end up having an experience that you may or may not be able to replicate, depending on how well you're able to model what they do, or how well you're able to pick out what is specific and important to making them great at what they do. So of course they looked to Virginia Satir, right, who was the family therapist, who was so excellent at being able to get down to the specificity, right? So she was well known for being able to sit down with, say, a family group. And when she sat down with a family group, she would be able to identify what was wrong specifically, and sort of which person and what the problem was that was causing the bigger issues for the whole group. And so people would come to her and they would just be amazed at the fact that she could get down to this granular idea, that this one person's idea or perspective or approach on something was creating this whole dynamic that everyone else was responding to. And if they resolved that, other things would get resolved. So there was that approach. Then they looked at Fritz Perls, who of course was identifying gestalts, right? Fritz Perls is the one who started working with gestalts. He also did a lot of ego work, and he did a lot of parts work, right? So two elements of submodalities that were directly corresponded with Fritz Perls is the idea of sitting two people down. So he would do a therapy and he would sit somebody, you guys are probably very familiar with this. One person sits in one chair, and then you imagine somebody sitting there over in another chair. Somebody's sitting there. So your mom's sitting there, your dad's sitting there, and then you say what you've got to say, right? So, you ruined my life, you're a terrible person, and I blame everything on you. And then he would say, now imagine, so hallucinate that you're sitting over there being that person, and respond to yourself. And after objections, of course, he would be able to get people to do that. So now we have the idea of associated and dissociated, right? So this very, very sort of binary idea of you're either having the experience from within, or you're experiencing this dissociated looking in experience. And the other thing is perceptual positions, right? So being able to shift the perspective, the internal world, into perceptual positions. And then the third person, of course, was Milton Erickson. And Milton Erickson, you guys are all familiar with Milton Erickson. You're just experiencing how he brings people into trance by getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so the concept of internal representations is that we get so fixated on the pictures in our head that we stop being able to step away from them and get perspective. And so when they looked at these three ideas and said, okay, well, how can these three great therapists take these three things, and what would we model then to be able to create an experience where we can even more accurately support people in having a better performance, right? A better performance of their relationship, or of their dancing ability, or their teaching ability, or their learning ability, or their belief in themselves, or whatever the performance is. So where that leads us to is this benefit of being able to move into trance with the tools of NLP that allow us to go into these really chunked up, wide, sort of fuzzy ideas that we're going to talk about the submodality of that later. And then the importance of being able to step out of trance, right? Which is what the meta model does. That's what Virginia Satir's work does. It allows us to step outside of our trance, because you guys know that we spend so much of our life in trance, but not in a good way. not in the good way that you would do if you were with a hypnotherapist or somebody doing it intentionally, but the trance of listening to the news and allowing all of that information to just be absorbed and accepted, or listening to the stories that people tell you, right? Listening to the criticisms or listening to other people's projections or ideas and allowing them to come in. And so the idea of being able to step out of our regular trance is in between those two things is where we work, right? This is why NLP is so effective, is in that recognition of moving in and out of trance and always, always paying attention to the internal world. What's really interesting about the internal world, so we all know map is not the territory, right? So you can all remember learning and practice the idea. Everything is simply an interpretation through our filters. So everything coming in, if you go back to the presuppositions of NLP, everything gets interpreted, right? So when visual information comes into your mind, you're not having a real experience of whatever it is out there, right? All the light comes in through your eyes and it goes through the giant part of your brain and your whole structure up here. It flips the image around, right? We all learned this in grade school or high school or something, right? And the image is actually upside down when it's inside, and then it gets projected, flipped around again and projected out. That's what we see, right? So we're not actually seeing we're not having a direct experience of the world out there. It's coming in through the filters of our brain, and then we're experiencing it. Same with sound, right? Auditory. So there's auditory nerves, and everything comes in and it gets filtered through our nerves, and we're hearing it through that interpretation, that filter. Same with kinesthetic through our nerve endings and everything else. The only experience you have that is in fact a direct experience is your olfactory. So your olfactory sense, which is of course like a subset of gustatory, right? Your olfactory and your gustatory are completely connected, and your gustatory has some filtering going on in terms of your neurology, but your olfactory, so the molecules of the scent actually go into your sinuses, and then they go directly into your limbic brain. And so your limbic brain is actually having a direct experience with the molecule. Olfactory is the only direct experience we have. Everything else, every other experience you have in the world is not a direct experience of the world. It goes in through your filters, and you have an internal projection or representation, and that's how you interpret it. So in a very basic way. So whenever you're doing NLP, and of course I explained that in the beginning to remind you that we're talking about a model of modeling excellence, right? For those of you that just joined in the last little while, I was earlier saying that the idea of sort of discounting NLP as a whole is missing the fact that NLP is a model itself. It's similar to if you were to say cooking doesn't work because of your experience with cooking. So everything that we're reacting to is an internal representation inside our own brain. So when we change this internal representation, we're changing our experience of the world. It's that simple, right? We have lots of fancy ways to do that. So we have lots of stuff, those of you that are trained in timeline therapy and all of the different modalities and the innovations that have come through new code NLP and everything else. But essentially it all carries the same objective. What we're doing now is we're finding more effective or more efficient ways to be able to shift these perceptions. Right? We're getting into like the deeper structures of them, or we're actually just literally finding different ways in, right? Timeline therapy is like a different way into the internal representation of our past memories. And so all of the different innovations we have still boil down to this internal representation being different. Transforming how we perceive things transforms our beliefs. So I want to tell you there's a couple of neat, you may have heard them before, but there's some cool stuff like the idea of modeling excellence. Wayne Gretzky is a really good example of this. When they slowed him down And they said, how can this guy be so good? Because he's not the best of anything. If you know anything about Wayne Gretzky, you know that he's not the fastest and he's not the biggest and he's not the most accurate and he's not the, all this stuff. He never wins in these individual things. But what he was best known for, and everyone knows who Wayne Gretzky is, right? Even Americans. I don't know. Is that he had this gift, this seeming gift, this like intuitive sense of always being exactly where the puck ended up. And when they would slow down the videos and they would say, how in the world did he know to be like, right over here in this weird spot, right where the puck came to before the guy had even received it, right? Like he had this gift. And what they figured out eventually was that Wayne Gretzky realized what he was doing with his unconscious mind was he was dissociating. So everybody else would describe what they were seeing from their perspective on the ice. He was going up above. He was literally describing it as if he was looking at the ice rink, as if it were like a chessboard. Like he's looking at the activity and imagining it from the perspective where he can see everything, which gave him this ability to anticipate where things were going. He was calculating all the movements. And so, of course, he wasn't doing this consciously, right? It's not like he sat down and somebody got his strategy and installed a new one. And, it would be difficult to replicate, but it's so important. It's such a good way for us to understand how imperative, how important it is to understand our internal representations. So Bandler would say, Richard Bandler, who was, reported to be a very sort of blunt and kind of obnoxious guy. He would say, people get afraid of messing with their minds, right? People are a little bit afraid of like, or they certainly were when he was writing back in the 70s and 80s. People are afraid to mess with stuff up here. And he would say, so fine, if you're afraid to mess with stuff up here, then stop listening to me and what I'm telling you. And instead, go to the back of the bus or wherever you are and start reading your National Enquirer or start reading the news, because your mind's getting messed with. Somebody's messing with the stuff up here. So you can either choose for it to be you or choose for it to be somebody else. And I think it's really, really, really like an essential piece of what you want to get across to your clients is that it's not as though the option is like, have a coach mess with your mind or have your mind unmessed with. The option is, have somebody who hopefully holds your best intention, has some skill to be able to guide the process to adjust and, mess with your mind, or have who knows who, messing with it. And I think once people understand that, it's a lot easier to, let go of any resistance and move into the process. So when you think about something, so I just want to, again, just this very basic fundamental idea of, if you were to think about a memory from the past. So I'd like everybody just to take a minute and think about a memory that's a good memory. Okay, let's start with a good memory. Just a I don't care if it's a week ago, a year ago, 20 years ago, just think of something really pleasant, something you're accustomed to thinking about that you can bring to mind fairly easily. If you want to close your eyes to do this, go ahead. That might make it a little easier for you. And I just want you to notice, as you look at this image, that you can start shifting things. So you might notice that this pleasant feeling that you associate with this image, you might notice that if you brighten the colors, I want you to just start brightening and intensifying the colors of this image. And you may notice that you can brighten them to where it's appropriate. You don't want to white it out or anything, but just make it really bright, really vibrant. Notice what you notice. And now I want you to dim the image. So I want you to take that same image and just dim it right down. Okay, make it so it's a real dim image and you can not see it very well. Okay, and then just bring it back and put it the way that it was, where it feels really good. and allow yourself to leave it there for the moment. So just notice that probably, this is not for sure, but for most of you, the experience of brightening all those colors, making it brighter, making it more intense, probably also intensified your good feeling. And then when you dimmed it and you made it much, much, much more dim, it likely just made those feelings a little less intense, right? It certainly wouldn't have changed them, shouldn't have made them negative or anything, but they'll just be less intense. And so this very simple thing, the truth of the matter is, you may have heard me say this many times, but you have an internal representation. You have a picture in your mind with every single memory or experience you've ever had in your whole entire life. And so because of that, sorry guys, I just noticed that the recording's paused. Maybe we'll just leave it. Well, no, I guess I'll do it. Okay. Because you've had your entire life, a lifetime full of memories, full of pictures in your mind, everything, every experience of your life is now a memory. Even if it's like knowledge that you learned or something you read about, it's still now stored in your mind as a memory, right? Because it happened before now. There's the before times and there's now. And then there's the after times, which are actually informed by the before times. So that's all you have. And you can either let it be, because unbeknownst to us, what's happening is these pictures are taking on the qualities of whatever your mind decides to, add to this image. So if the image itself is just there, and usually we just let them be, what we notice now is just very, very simple things like brightening an image can connect us even more strongly to the feelings of that memory. Why not do that? Why not do that for yourself? If there's a memory that's bothering you that doesn't feel good and there's no action to be taken, right? We can talk in a minute about, when it's useful to take action on something or when you may get that message. But if it's just like a memory sitting there feeling unpleasant, then dim it. It's your choice. You can do this. You can just decide to turn the lights down on that. And what we know, what Bandler suspected and started noticing in his own anecdotal experience at the beginning of this, and what now has been proven over and over and over, over decades and decades, and many, 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 many practitioners out there, is that this tends to be the pattern. We do have patterns. Of course, there's going to be exceptions, right? So of course you're going to have, like, if my, favorite memory or something is like, sitting at the sunset with my dog and my daughter, and there's an intentional, the dimness makes it cozier, then of course you're not going to have the relationship of like brightening up and making it more colorful will make the feelings better. You're going to have little exceptions like that. But by and large, when you make things bright and intense and they're positive memories, it tends to make you more connected and have a more intense experience of it. And when they're dark and dim, you tend to have a more dissociated, disconnected experience of it. The other submodalities that you guys know of, so of course, what we do in practitioner and NLP practitioner is we teach you the basic ones to work with. So over time, over the last bunch of decades, how we say the driver, we use the drivers. So they've basically kind of taken like the top, I forget what it is, 10 or 12 submodalities that seem to have the most important change, that drive the most important change. And that's what we have on that checklist for you, is the ones that tend to have the most, but they are infinite, the number of submodalities that you could shift on an experience. So don't feel as though you're limited to that sheet, right? I doubt any of you do, but if you did, you certainly feel absolutely free. Like it may be that somebody is very depressed, okay? What we know is a common thing that happens for people who are depressed is they will say something like, I've been depressed for 13 years. Oh, no. Here's a really good example. I don't know where this comes from, somewhere in the literature. A woman who's having a really good time at a party and she dances for a couple of hours and she has a really great time. And then as she's leaving, somebody is something's going on and she ends up with a coffee cup or something or red wine, all spills all over her beautiful dress and ruins her dress. So she spins out into a state. And the language that's coming out of her is, my whole night is ruined. This is totally ruined my night. This is awful. This is terrible. And when she was interviewed a little while later, and they said, why did that upset you so much? How did that ruin your whole night? And they actually went into the submodalities of how that affected her experience. When she saw herself dancing now, even though she danced for 3 hours before this happened, she saw herself dancing with the stains all over her dress. That negative event in her mind, in the picture of her mind, had literally, visually, literally tainted the whole experience of that night. You can imagine how easy that is to do, right? I'm sure probably we all did it to some extent, sometime this week with some experience. And so it would benefit her. And I dare say it would not be, sticking her head in the sand, so to speak, right? Doing work like this isn't saying she should not have had any reaction to the wine on her dress. I think there's a warranted and appropriate, like, holy shit, that sucks. That would be appropriate. What isn't appropriate, what isn't warranted, and what only makes her life feel bad is when she allows that memory to then stain the memory of the entire night. Wouldn't it benefit her if she could have the memory of the night stay that fun, beautiful, sensory experience she had, and then let that smaller part of the night, the last 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever, stay proportionate to the experience? And so in doing that, when we slow things down, and if she were my client, and if I had the foresight to ask her an experience like that, and then pause and check for the internal representation of what came to mind when she says, and that ruined my whole night. If I were to pause and say, okay, can you get a picture? And if I picked up that there was now a stain on her dress 3 hours long that wasn't there, I would very easily change it, right? So these are submodalities as well. So what I would do is I would take whatever image, the end of the night, that has the qualities of it that are going to have certain characteristics, right? So it may be that the picture's over here to the right. I don't know where my hands are here. Where am I? There I am. The picture's over here to the right, and it has, it's bright and it's moving and it's going really fast, maybe, or, whatever the qualities are. And then the image of the evening of dancing, maybe over here, and it has some other quality to it. I'm going to move the submodalities and I'm going to put it back when I actually get her specifically to remember, okay, can you remember the best moment on the dance floor? Remember that you don't have a stain on your dress. Just go back to that best moment on the dance floor. And I would get her to describe it. So she would say, it's right here in front of me. It's this big. It's, framed here. It's moving at a natural, to a rhythmic pace or whatever the case may be, right? I would get the qualities. And then I would actually get her experience, and I would move the experience of the night into that picture. I would map it across, and I would make the whole experience match that positive experience she had. Then I would take the 5 minutes at the end when the dress was ruined, and I would get that image and I would make it really, really small. I don't even need to map it into anything. I don't need to map it into anything. I can just simply take that image and say, okay, you've got this beautiful image of your night. And now you've got this little thing that happened. And I'm sorry, guys, I can't tell where my hands are here. Okay, if the image is here, and then I would say, you've got this little image that's a little dimmer, much, much, much smaller, and your dress got, whatever. And then I would have her look at that, memorize that. And then I would say to her, I break state, and then I would say, okay, now, when you think about your evening, now how does it feel? I guarantee to you that she's going to feel better about it. She has shifted her perception of how her experience of the night was felt. Okay. So this is what I think is really important about submodalities. Stop me, guys. If you have any questions at all, go ahead. I'm not going to talk very long tonight. I'm going to probably speak for another 10 minutes or so. And then I actually want to open it up into discussion sooner than we have before. When and where would we use this in PACE? So all over the place. Good question. So everywhere. So the difficulty with, we have to teach you a protocol. Our intention in PACE and of course in PRAC is to get the tools to you so that you can effectively use the tools, right? And in PACE, of course, it's very distinctly and specifically so that you can go through the process of a breakthrough. We can't put submodality work into that unless we put it as a little tag on every single step saying, and optional, do a submodality shift. We'd have to put that after clearing anger, after clearing hurt, after clearing fear, right? We'd have to just like every single one of them, because that's how it's used. It could be used effectively. We could even say, open your session. When I've had really difficult clients, some of you may have experienced this when you get a client who walks in and they're just in a crappy place. I mean, I work with some pretty severe stuff. And it's really hard over Zoom, right? When you can't even control the environment. Like when I have people walking into my office, I don't have to do this as much because I can energetically control their experience of the space, right? I make sure that I'm in a really, really like powerfully strong, good, positive state myself, which is of course really important. I also make sure my office is like, clean, that I have nice, happy, colorful pictures on the wall, that the office temperature is good, that all that kind of stuff, which we of course can't control over Zoom, right? You don't know if somebody's sitting in a freezing cold apartment or if they're in a place where every time they look up to the right, they look at the computer at you, but when they look to the right, they're looking at like this pile of crap that they haven't sorted out for 5 months that has in itself all sorts of meaning. This is definitely something that we need to take into consideration when we're doing Zoom. It's why Alan hates he doesn't hate training, but it's why he really, really, really dislikes training over Zoom, because one of the things that's really uncontrollable is the person's direct environment. I mean, we just talked about how olfactory is the only direct experience you have in the whole world, and in your whole experience, and you can't control that, right? When you're doing it over Zoom, you can control it in an environment like this. So my point is, one of the things that you can do even at the beginning of a session, if you sense that somebody is not in a good place, that you just right out of the gate, right? Doesn't matter what step you're on, where you are in the process, you can use submodalities to shift their current experience, right? So if I'm working with someone, especially online, what I might say to them is, give me a quick little overview of like what's going on. Why are you feeling like crap right now? Why are you so, nervous or closed in or whatever the thing is? And then I might ask them to bring to mind a quality, right? So if I can meta model it, like if I can they'll say to me, well, I just really, every morning when I wake up, I just feel really depressed and down. Well, that's like a golden platter of data for me, right? Because there's so much to work with there. There's so much data there. First of all, it is not true that every single morning, that's not true. You didn't come out of the womb with this morning condition of being depressed. That didn't happen at day one. So you already have an internal representation of their experience that is inaccurate. So you've got that to work with, right? So you can just go to a very, very basic, like, has it always been this way, right? And you can direct their attention back to when it wasn't that way and see what you can pick up there, right? When was the last time you actually woke up? Well, how old were you? Or how many months ago? Or how many years ago? Or how many days ago did you wake up and feel okay? Do you remember what it felt like when you would wake up, or have you had a special event in your life, the day that you were going to go to your, favorite, whatever. So you can use that kind of data, or you could just say to them, okay, what is it that, waking up in the morning, feeling depressed or anticipating feeling depressed, what is in your experience that you could focus on that wouldn't make you depressed? And chances are they'll go, nothing. But that's your opportunity, right? To say, honestly, there's nothing. Is there no windows? Look outside, right? There's a sky out there, there's stars, or there's, whatever there is, there's a sun out there, and you can start directing their experience to change their focus of their immediate surrounding. As soon as you have their focus on something in their surrounding that is different from what they have been focused on, create a picture, right? So then you just get this imagination. So imagine if when you woke up and you made your coffee in the morning, what if the first thing you did when you took that sip of coffee is you imagined whatever pleasant thing to focus on you have found, whether it's in their memory or in their direct environment or wherever you found it. And then have them imagine that. Literally just imagine, make it up, imagine it. What would that be like? What if you actually found yourself sitting there having your coffee and smiling? And as soon as you can get, I promise you, you can just really gently and really respectfully, you can get someone to shift just a little. You don't need a dramatic, radical, like, holy shit, the world's open up and there's rainbows now pouring in. Like, we're not looking for that. We're looking for a fixed position in their mind that has a fixed set of submodalities around that belief to shift into one that is unfixed, shift into one that has possibility. Now their brain has gone, oh, actually, there is the possibility of another way I could be first thing in the morning. Cool. That's enough. That's enough often to just change state. So some modalities like that. So in terms of, when you use this in your coaching, you use it whenever and wherever you feel it's appropriate. I would say that it's probably the most, it's the most reliable go-to if you don't know what to do. Like if you don't know what to do with a client, so say you've had them up on their timeline for 3 or 4 things. They've got that timeline fatigue happening because they've been up there so many times, or you've done core transformations with them, for 3 or 4 things over the last few times, and they're beginning to sort of, how you can sometimes feel from your client that they're not buying into it in this moment. In any of those moments, you can always move to a submodality shift and you're going to get traction every time. As long as they're doing it, as long as they're actually following direction. And when you ask them to close their eyes and see a purple balloon, that they close their eyes and see the purple balloon, and then you start shifting it, you're going to start getting change. You're going to start getting a different experience. So if you were say not confident that they had, I don't know, that they were feeling maybe they had like a lot of self-consciousness and you've worked through a whole bunch of stuff, but you're not totally convinced that they've got it, that physiologically and neurologically and emotionally and everything else, you don't feel like they necessarily had, and they're showing that to you, when you sort of get that, like, yeah, I think it's better. And you're like, ugh. When you get that sort of thing, go work with the submodalities around it. It is that simple. It could be as simple as the brain. You've done all the good work, right? You've cleared the beliefs, you've transformed the you've done all this stuff around it. Now what they need physiologically for their neurology to actually have a familiar experience of what that new belief or behavior looks like, right? So you have a traditional swish. A swish is just a submodality shift. It's just an innovative one and it's fast and, we do it. But again, that doesn't always work especially well over Zoom. It's fine. Like I've done them, but I definitely feel like the swish is, because people are looking at like a small screen and part of the swish is actually having their eyes go up into the visual cortex and down, right? So it's not necessarily always going to be as effective. So just a basic submodality shift, right? So you say, okay, you know what? Let's just tap into all this work we've been doing around your sense of self-confidence. And before, you had this really heightened sense of being self-conscious when you were in X environment, right? So when you're with your peers and you felt like people were looking at you, you were feeling, remember that? Okay, just bring back, just for a moment, bring back a picture of that. Good. Get the submodalities. Get a picture of you absolutely feeling everything you just felt, right? So now you bring in their learnings, go to their timeline. If they've cleared the belief, which they would have by this point, bring in those learnings, tell them to close their eyes and to see themselves in that environment, standing there, feeling really confident, grounded in who they are and their value and their worth, and then say their learnings back to them. Bring them into this image. If you've done a core transformation with them, give them the intended outcomes, right? That chain of outcomes, bring that back into the image, feed it into this picture. And then as you're doing that, just give an experience to them to adapt themselves. So you're going to make suggestions. So you might say something like, just notice what happens if you add even more vibrancy to this picture, make the colors even brighter. Or if you're looking at like a two-dimensional picture of yourself, expand it so it has a ton of depth to it. Make it a big 3D image. Look behind yourself and see, the ocean behind you, or see the people, see the whole room, like add depth to it and see how that feels, and let your client give you feedback on how these submodality changes are affecting their experience. It does two things, right? It immediately gives them authorship over their own experience. They will immediately, whether they acknowledge it consciously or not, realize that their own mind, just shifting the pictures in their mind, gives them a different emotional connection to that experience. That's huge for both their conscious and unconscious mind, to realize that, like, oh, holy shit, if I like, you might say to them, okay, if you're seeing, 4 square meters of space, now see 20, right? Make the landscape, or the, however you call that, like expand the picture so there's more there. Oh, that makes you feel less excited about it. Okay, put it back here so it's a little closer up, right? And so you can play with it. And so their mind is getting that lesson of like, oh, I could control this experience and my emotional reaction to it. Interesting. And you're going to let their unconscious mind, which of course is always the smartest mind in the room, you're letting them be the guide of what is going to be the best K for them, right? Like the best emotional, whatever, experience that they need for themselves. Like for some people, they need to see it really, this way for them to get the kinesthetic that is going to stick the experience. Some people need to like hear it, right? You need to adjust the auditory submodalities, right? So make that voice in your head when you're standing there saying, I know my value. I am grounded. I am unshaken. Their opinion is just their opinion. Whatever the words are, make that really, really loud in your head. See how that feels. And now make it just a whisper, just a nice steady whisper. See how that feels, right? Let your client experience for themselves how that's going to change it. And once you have one, there's no denying it. They'll get in, if you're working with these submodalities, and it's really intuitive, you don't need to have, you can have a list of submodalities, certainly, but you can just sort of play with them, and then your client will let you know. You will absolutely know when your client gets that sense of like, yeah, no, now it's good. This feels right. Beautiful, lock it in, right? And then you give them the tasking of memorizing that picture, and you just assure them that the unconscious mind will absolutely memorize this, and then have them practice it, right? Have them just, do that thing where you do a little pen mark on your finger or your hand. And every time they see that little pen mark on their hand, they're going to bring to mind that really strong, grounded, confident picture of themselves. Awesome. It changes their perspective and it changes their direct experience. Okay. If anyone has a question, shoot it as I look at my notes and see if I forgot anything before we go on.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I was just kind of That kind of made me think of moment with the client. Like it kind of came up like she wants to believe that she's beautiful, but she doesn't feel like she is. So
Yes.
like if you're doing like a submodality shift there, um, like I'm just trying to think, like I don't know if it, like I was trying to figure out if it would be like almost more detrimental to like make it brighter and stuff like that for that person, or would you just kind of like play with it to see what feels right for them?
So, yeah, interesting. Good. Okay. So, okay, I'm going to just connect this to a few things really quickly before, and then I will directly address it in a sec. Okay.
Mhm.
So the next thing that I was going to address is some people, sometimes you will hear that some people feel like shifting submodalities is just like distracting you from the issues. Okay. What we know is that if you ask somebody who in real time has a really strong sense of like self, right? So they're just one of those people that, you know, they go through life just feeling really confident about themselves or really happy or something like that. And if you ask them, if you were to take the time to ask them, how did they sort their memories? You would get a lot of answers, and it's been documented, and I'm telling you stuff from lots and lots and lots of different people who do this work. They would say something like, um, whenever I have a happy memory, I I feel like those memories, like they're so big, like they're so big in my mind, and they always even have this sort of like rose colored kind of filter to them. And every time I think about them, it fills me. When I think about the hard times in my life, I don't know, they're smaller. They're just like, they're darker, they're smaller. They don't, I just, I know that they don't serve me. And so I just kind of keep them there. This is a healthy mind doing what serves a person really, really well to live a really happy, meaningful life. This is not a mind saying like, oh, I can't think about that. I can't think about that because if I do, well, guess what that is? Think it through, right? If somebody says, I just don't think about that because when I do, you know what it does? If they had the language and you were doing, what it does is when they do think about it, comes right up close, doesn't it? Big, bright, probably panoramic. I mean, if you had all your worst memories right up close, big, front and center, playing like a movie, huge, you know, like overwhelming you, then of course that's going to be hard to deal with, right? Of course you're going to want to like distract yourself and do the whole like not dealing with it. But if your negative memories are ones that you can bring to mind, and when you do bring them to mind, you have a sense of that was bad, you know, that was something that I wouldn't want to do again, that caused me pain and hurt and whatever, and it's right there, and it's smaller, you know, and it's, I just know. And the only way you can know things is through your inner world. I know that that experience was a one off. And you know, the majority of my experiences, you know, I drove my car 100,000 times safely and didn't get carjacked. That one time that I did get carjacked, that was one time. I remember the 10,000 times that I drove my car safely. When people say things like, what put me into a depressed state was that I walked outside and I had a flat tire. Well, or, you know, ruined my whatever, ruined everything. Well, the flat tire isn't going to do that. And when you ask somebody like that, well, what is it that you actually have to do and say to yourself to have that like completely blow up your mood and your day and your emotional state and everything else? They're going to say stuff like, well, that always happens. It always happens. Or, stuff like this just completely throws me off course. And they're bringing to mind these isolated events as if they're much bigger. And they're not remembering the 3,000 times they went outside and their car worked perfectly fine. Right. So, again, to adjust that. So, what's important about that is that somebody who has a belief that they are not beautiful, there's so much that is going to be internalized in their own internal representation of themselves A whole bunch of it is going to be the perceived projection of other people's perceptions of them, right? And a whole bunch of it will be their own projections outward. So you're going to get a mix of both, right? So you're going to have to do the work to actually, you could do it all with some modalities, but it would take a really long time and it would be pretty tedious. So we have much more eloquent ways of doing it, like timeline therapy, like dealing, certainly dealing with any trauma. Often when people have really, really stuck beliefs of themselves as being unattractive or anything in that realm, there's trauma associated to it. Almost always, if you can't shift them. So there might be some trauma there to work with, but certainly beliefs, right? So assume you did the work, the core transformation that you definitely need to do on the part that feels unattractive or doesn't feel beautiful. Unfortunately, you have to go and find the word. Remember, the mind only works in the positive. Mind doesn't negate. So if you said the part of you that doesn't feel beautiful, what does it feel? And she's going to say something that is hurtful, like ugly or unattractive or whatever, right? And so you've got to do a core transformation on that part for sure. And then you're going to work with the beliefs, right? So when did they decide that beauty looked one way, right? When did they decide that beauty had the parameters, the narrow parameters that we see beauty having today? All that kind of stuff. So you want to do the work around that. But once you've done that, Submodalities is going to be your golden ticket for her. That is going to be probably more effective for something that is so physical like that is such a where you have to work with all the VAKs, right? A belief like I'm confident, you don't have to do very much with your being. You might hold your shoulders back. You might hold your chin up a little more, something like that, but nothing is really drastically going to change. The shift is so internal. When you have a difference, like you go from believing I'm whatever the not beautiful version is into I am beautiful. That is like your eyes literally are going to see differently, right? It's exactly like looking at a flower and I don't know, when you see the whole bouquet and you don't pay attention to the one specific flower, you couldn't really describe it and notice its beauty. But then if you just draw your attention to the one flower in the bouquet, it's like all of a sudden it has all this extraordinary beautiful beauty that was actually going into your eyes before, you just couldn't see it. That's what you're doing, right? She's going to see herself differently. So she's going to look in the mirror and she's going to be able, through your help and the shifting of submodalities, to focus on those things that allow her to experience herself as beautiful. So your submodality work is going to encompass whatever the negative thing is, right? So the idea of however she sees herself as ugly or unattractive, or I don't know what the thing, her term would be, it has to be her words, right? And then you're going to map that across into something that's not true. In so doing, I would further amplify it by making sure that it is something that is small, that is dim. So you guys all have that submodality script where you just map across, but sometimes our used to be true but not true memories are like, I used to own a red bike. I don't own a red bike anymore, but your memory of the red bike is like a totally sweet, memory. It's big and bright and right in front of you. You don't want that for this, right? So if I was doing like, you don't like ice cream anymore, I don't care how big and bright the old one is, right? If it's something like, I thought that I didn't like reading, but now I believe that I do like reading. It's a choice, right? That's fine. The old memory can have whatever submodalities, but when it's something like I'm ugly or unattractive, you do want to make sure that you're mapping into a small belief, something that you can notably have as like small, that doesn't have much power. And then you have this image of looking at themselves beautiful, and you may have to really support this. So you may have to really infuse that image with everything that you've gathered, right? So you're directing their attention to, like, maybe there are some qualities about themselves that they never noticed, how beautiful their hair is, or how gorgeous they're, they've been complimented on their smile, like, or whatever the qualities are that they can focus on. And, or it may be that concept of like, the only thing beautiful about any human being is their heart at the end of the day, right? And if so, what she starts to see is, like, when you walk into a room, you have a choice whether you become the most beautiful person in that room or not. It's always your choice, right? You can always walk in. I don't care if you're a troll living under a bridge, doesn't matter. And nothing matters. If you walk into that room and you choose to be beautiful in that room, then you can experience yourself that way. Not to say that everybody else, that you don't want to ever mislead somebody into thinking like, and then everyone will see your beauty and call you beautiful, right? Like, you don't want to mislead, because the world is still full of their own conditioned response to beauty, right? So what you need to make sure you're doing is saying that for you, you can walk into that room and know your beauty. Feel beautiful, know your beauty. How other people react to you, that's up to them. That's about them. That's not about you. It's none of your business, really, actually, how they were brought up and how they were conditioned and how they choose to see it, right? And so the beauty from her is something that you're going to nurture. And it really depends, right? It really depends what you have to work with in terms of what people are able and willing and where they are in their journey, right? What they can accept and everything. But Submodalities is going to be your best friend when you're working with stuff like that, and just over and over and over again. And I would every session like bookend it with images of themselves that way. Make sure you keep the submodalities of that bright. Which brings me to my final point. These submodalities sometimes will take a life of their own. And if there's still some little beliefs that are like little naggy, shitty beliefs that are kind of pulling on them, right? So say I get a belief, a nice, strong, like, belief that that I learn quickly and efficiently and just perfect for myself. And I have it and it's strong, and I keep it for a while. And then I walk into like a class and I'm confused, I'm tired, and the information seems to be just like not connecting, and I all of a sudden feel like I don't get it, and I feel that creeping suspicion of like, maybe I'm not actually that smart, maybe I can't actually learn that well, and all the old stuff creeps back, which it will, by the way. You'll always have stuff that will come up. You want to make sure that your clients know how to adjust their own submodalities. This should not be kept in the hands of like coaches only, and your secret thing that they have to like call you now and make an appointment and pay a bunch of money and find a tele. That's not what you're going for as a coach, right? That is not going to work for you in the long run. What works for you in the long run is your client being able to sit there and go, okay, I know this. I know this feeling. I know what's happening. I see you. I respect you. I get it. You're starting to get like afraid or overwhelmed or whatever the thing is. And then you close your eyes and you teach your client how to bring back that image of like, you learn beautifully, exactly as you're meant to learn. There's, whatever the stuff is around that. And what they're going to notice almost for sure is that when they first bring the image, they can't do it. Like if it had a beautiful frame around it, because that's what made them feel great, it's not there. And if it was really bright, it's not so bright anymore. And if it was really big and just like, directly in front of them in 3D, it's kind of 2D, and it's, whatever it is. And so you've got to teach them to be able to bring that back, make it available to them. It's a resource for them. Make it available to them so they can always have that. And it's that simple. And you have them practice it, right? So you have them sit there. You have the opportunity to sit with them and say, okay, I want you to close your eyes right now. And I'm going to say nothing. I'm going to sit here, and I want you to recreate that image with all the life and vibrancy and everything else that it had, right? If they absolutely can't, and they're like, Tara, I cannot do it. I cannot bring it back up. Great. Perfect. Where's the part of you that is stopping you from being able to access that right now? And would you find that part in your body and ask that part what it wants? Do a core transformation on the part that's stopping them from having the experience. Or when did you decide that you can't access a resourceful state when you're boyfriend just dumped you, or your, it's 5 a.m, whatever the case is, right? So it gives you another thing, and then you work with that, and now go back to the submodality. Make sure that you go back to that picture, reinforce it, get it really strong, and have the person able to access it. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Ask me your questions.
Hey, Tara, thanks for that. That was amazing. I have 2 questions, if that's all right.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So, new NLP practitioner and addictions. So, I'm curious. I mean, it seems like timeline and so much of our tools would be great for a lot of the underlying pain there. But I just want to check in, like, how do you handle that if a new client is asking about working through an addiction with us?
Okay, so NLP is not perfect for addictions, first of all.
Okay.
And there is a beautiful use of using NLP, probably too generally. NLP tools, but I would say that you need additional skills in addiction therapy, right? So as soon as you're dealing with addictions that have a physiological component to them, so if you're dealing with alcohol addiction, or if you're dealing with drug addiction, or if you're dealing with, I don't know, like sex, gambling, shopping, those kinds of addictions we can deal with.
Great.
Because they don't have that physiological aspect of the others. But if you're dealing with something that does actually affect then there's other skills that you need that I'm not trained in, and we certainly haven't trained you guys in. You may have them, but so that's one piece. That said, if somebody is doing, is that the case, Ashley? Like, is she or he only coming to you to deal with the addiction, or are you one of many people they're working with? I'm gonna stop the recording, guys.
Yeah, I think I would be like one of the first lines of attack. Like, someone posted something alarming on Facebook and I was like, pretty sure I can help with that, like at least part of it.
Okay. So in that case, you would do you don't do anything different ever. I mean, you do PACE, right? You've got to first deal with that past negative stuff. You're never going to get anywhere with a client, or not as effectively in the way we like to create change. Good night, Bev. If you don't clear that stuff first, right? So regardless of what the addiction is, or how serious it is, or anything else, you're still going to clear the negative emotions to the best of your ability. Why is it recording again? Oh, was it recording all along on like a different? Oh.
It ever stopped recording?
Oh, and did it record the whole thing?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, I'm just going to slip to the other room. Actually, before I finish, I'm going to shut off the recording,
Okay.
so we don't have to worry about